you are invited to speak, and when you were speaking I would ask where possible that you have your camera switched on and be mindful that we are in public session. In addition, I would like to remind members of the constitutional requirements that members must be physically present within the confines of the place which Parliament has chosen to sit, namely Leinster House or the Convention Centre, in order to participate in public meetings, and I will not permit a member to participate where they are not adhering to this constitutional requirement. Therefore, any member who attempts to participate in the meeting from outside the precincts will be refused. And our item today is consideration of the National Action Plan for Childminding 2021 to 2028, and I'd like to welcome all of our witnesses. Everybody is joining us virtually, so you're addressing the committee virtually via MS Teams, and the following witnesses will address the committee. We have Miss Marion Quinn, who's chairperson, and Miss Ida Lane, also of the Association of Childhood Professionals, Miss Bernadette Orbrinsky-Burke, who is the Chief Executive, and we have Miss Mary Walsh, who is the Chairperson of Childminding Ireland, and then we have Miss Teresa Heaney, who is the Chief Executive Officer, and we also have Miss Frances Byrne, Director of Policy and Advocacy of Early Childhood Ireland. And Miss Byrne, I'm aware that your colleague Miss Heaney is attending another meeting with the Minister and will join us once she can get to this meeting. So the purpose of the meeting today is to engage with you on the National Action Plan for Childminding 2021 to 2028. The aim of the action plan is to provide greater recognition for childminding and to support childminders in their work of providing high quality early learning and care and school age childcare, thus supporting child development and learning outcomes and helping families. It is envisaged that the action plan will involve change and significant benefits for childminders, children and the families using their services. Members of the committee wish to hear the opinions of stakeholders working in the industry in relation to the provisions of the action plan. So just before I invite witnesses to give their opening statements, I just need to remind you in relation to parliamentary privilege when addressing a parliamentary committee. As all the witnesses are appearing before the committee virtually, I need to just point out that there is uncertainty if parliamentary privilege will apply to your evidence from a location outside of the parliamentary precincts of Leinster House. Therefore, if you are directed by me to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter, it is imperative that you comply with any such direction. So I'm going to call on witnesses in the order that they delivered their opening statements. So we'll first go into the Association of Childhood Professionals and Miss Ida Lane, and then we'll go to Childminding Ireland with Miss Bernadette Orbrinsky-Burke, and then finally on to Early Childhood Ireland with Miss Frances Byrne. So we'll obviously have questions and answers when everybody is finished. So firstly, can I please call on Miss Ida Lane, and you're very welcome and thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much indeed. I'd like to thank the committee for the invitation to speak to you today. In my statement here, I'm here on behalf of the Association of Childhood Professionals, ACP, a voluntary membership organisation representing practitioners in early years of school-age childcare. As a professional association, all our members are at least a minimum of level 5 qualifications in early years, and this includes our members who are childminders. I myself am Ida Lane. I've been providing home-based early years and after-school care in my family home for the past 14 years. I started childminding, providing the service to 3 preschool children, and with this number, the regulations precluded me from registering with the HSC. So, like many other childminders, I became a member of the professional childminders organisation, Childminding Ireland. I've got childminding insurance, guard the vetting, paediatric first aid, I've done child protection training, as well as voluntarily notifying my service with my local childcare committee. I registered in 2009 to enable my service to survive the introduction of the free preschool year. I registered with the HSE and opened my ECI preschool, catering for 6 preschool children, which I still run in the heart of my home to this day. So I feel I'm well positioned to speak here regarding the difficulties of working with increased regulation, inspection and oversight within the home environment. I've been asked to set out today what I see as being strengths and challenges of the recently published National Childminding Action Plan. The strengths include a recognition that childminders are an integral part of the childcare landscape in Ireland, showing how childminders offer care to multi-age children, as in family groups, preschool, going and after-school care. They can all be catered for. Recognition that low adult to child ratios and consistent caring in a family home setting offer positive well-being outcomes for children. There is acknowledgement that childminders can offer a wraparound childcare option, which can be flexible and negotiable, and where possible, offer flexibility in terms of early, late, overnight and weekend arrangements. The action plan builds on recommendations, experiences and expertise gathered from childminders, children, parents, childminding networks, organisations and county childcare committees. Formal recognition is finally being given to the childminding sector, recognising that children, families and communities have benefited from the quality of care offered through the dedication and commitment of childminders who offer their childcare services. The comprehensiveness of its approach, identifying core areas of implementation, namely regulations and inspection, training and support, funding and financial support, consultation and communication. Excuse me, have a safe drink. Okay. Whilst I welcome the formal recognition of the action plan that gives central placement of childminding in the Irish childcare landscape, there are, in my view, certain challenges within the plan. Namely, the time frame for the full implementation of the plan is overly ambitious, considering that there are thousands of non-regulated childminders caring for children that have absolutely no idea that regulation of childminding is rapidly approaching, or that they will need to engage in accredited training and meet regulations and face inspections. Serious investment in communication and consultation will have to be made to engage these childminders. Connections were made with only a small percentage of working childminders, generally those that are already engaged with TUSLA, Childminding Ireland and the local county childcare committees. These childminders are already committed to raising professional standards in childcare and welcome appropriate regulation. However, their view may not be shared by many who see childminding as a short-term, more casual job. I have concerns also that the department sees the networking groups as being their main communication highways to reach out and contact or connect with many or all childminders. I'm also concerned that experienced, knowledgeable childminders will be excluded for applying for childminding development officer positions due to not having level 8 degrees that are based on centre rather than home-based care and education. I also believe that childminders must be centrally involved in the development of a phased training and qualifications framework that identifies as necessary training, desirable training, and finally, as childminding incrementally becomes increasingly more professionalised, what would be the qualifications or needs of the icing of the cake. All training needs need to be accredited, and to allow for professional and personal commitments, training should possibly be broken down into smaller micro-credentials that incrementally build to a full qualification. We should note that increased regulation, administration, inspection, audits, etc. will result in higher financial costs for childminders. Significant state investment will be required to make sure that this increased cost does not mean that childminders cannot operate without charging parents more. We also need to be mindful that significant investment continues to be required for development of centre-based provision, both early years and school age. The funding required to implement this action plan cannot be to the detriment of continued increased investment in that area for centre-based provision. We also need to be mindful that small home and centre-based services, subject to current regulations, standards, inspections and oversight, may well lose out to childminders who may be subject to less onerous inspections and regulations. So those are my views, and thank you for listening, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lane. I'm moving on now to Ms. Orbinski-Burke, and if you'd like to deliver your opening statement, please.
Thanks very much. My name is Bernadette Orbinski-Burke, and I'm the Chief Executive of Childminding Ireland, and I'm here today with Mary Walsh, our Chairperson of Childminding Ireland. I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to make this presentation at a time when policy developments and structural changes will have a direct impact on the future of childminding in Ireland. We've lodged a submission with the committee, and in the interests of time, I'm reading a truncated version. Many of you on this committee or your family members will have had your children minded by a childminder. I really need you to picture that childminder. Have you that childminder in your head? How will new policy and regulatory environment impact on them? And how are their views being captured by the government as it makes changes? We all want the same thing in terms of an environment that supports healthy, happy, safeguarded and flourishing children, which is what quality childminders provide to the children in their care. Childminding is a relationship-based, home-from-home form of childcare. The same childminder would typically mind a child from babyhood through to secondary school. Childminding is different from centre-based childcare in a number of important respects. For example, childminding takes place in a family home, not in a commercial premises. Childminders mind small numbers of children. Spontaneity is possible and allows each childminding day to be child-led. Children belong there, they don't attend there. Childminding Ireland is the organisation fighting for childminding, founded by childminders and run by childminders at every level within the organisation. We represent over 4,000 childminding contacts throughout the country, both childminders and parents using their services. We actively encourage childminders to become engaged. We believe in a grassroots approach and empowering childminders. For the first time in the history of the state, all childminding is now being included in the regulatory and support system. We would urge the committee to recommend that the one organisation with the authentic childminding voice should be adequately funded. I know you want to hear our thoughts on the action plan for childminding. While Childminding Ireland supports the vision, aims and objectives of the action plan, we have serious concerns about the implementation. The action plan promises many positives. For example, training will be delivered in formats that are suited to childminders. New regulations and a new inspection model that are specific to childminding will be introduced. However, we're deeply concerned about the implementation of the plan, as the initial signs from the workforce development planning process are not positive. Childminding should materially input on the shape of things to come and be in the majority, supported by relevant framework experts, for example, QQI and ETB, for training and supports advisory group. The department's method of consultation with childminders also needs new thinking. We know that the department was satisfied with the consultation on the draft action plan. We were not. There also needs to be active engagement with parents who choose childminders for their children. Parental satisfaction with childminding is currently very high. Clarity is needed on the evaluation of progress. How will we know what's working and what isn't? Parental satisfaction is high, as I said. There's a lot yet to be decided. We need some new thinking. The gravitational pull towards centre-based care as the norm is very strong. Recommendations for childminding are being created through the prism of a centre-based view. The Workforce Development Plan Steering Group is currently without a single childminding representative, and the structures feeding into the steering group are dominated by centre-based interests. Our recommendations are: there are thousands of childminders that are unengaged and unaware that the action plan exists. This must be acknowledged and addressed. Childminders and those proximate to childminding must be in the majority on all of the advisory groups of the action plan. It's inappropriate for those not proximate to childminding to be making recommendations for an entire workforce. Childminding Ireland must have a seat on the steering group of the Workforce Development Plan. Childminding Ireland needs to be appropriately resourced to support and represent childminding and parents, particularly at this time of change. Thank you for your time and attention, and we're happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Burke. And now moving on to Ms. Frances Byrne, please.
Thank you, Deputy Function. And as you've already said, our CEO is sending her apologies. She's attending a meeting with the department, but hopes to be here in time to join the follow-up questions and answers. We very much welcome the opportunity to present to the committee today about the recently published National Action Plan for Childminding. As the leading support organisation in our sector, we have also broadly welcomed the plan. As members of the committee will know, childminding is regulated in most European countries, and Early Childhood Ireland strongly believes that the move to regulate the current informal childminding sector in Ireland is in the very best interests of children here. As the plan recognises, and we agree, childminding plays a central role in the provision of both early learning and care and school-age childcare in Ireland. The plan follows through on the commitments made in the First 5 strategy published in late 2018 and in last year's programme for government. It estimates that there are approximately 15,000 non-relative childminders in Ireland. At the moment, the Childcare Act 1991, as we have heard from previous speakers, exempts most childminders from regulation. So currently there are fewer than 80 childminders registered with TUSLA. One consequence of this is that the vast majority of childminders cannot take part in the National Childcare Scheme, so thousands of families cannot access subsidies to reduce the fees they pay. Our second annual Childcare Barometer, which was published in 2019 and with which we have provided members with a link today, showed overwhelming public support for ensuring regulations and supports were extended to all paid childminders. At the time, 87% of Irish adults were in favour of Garda vetting and basic training requirements for childminding, and we believe that this was testament to the importance of this option for families. As members of the committee will also know, the National Action Plan mainly addresses self-employed childminders who work in their own homes. It is not primarily concerned with au pairs or nannies who work in the child's home. The plan does, however, include an action to develop information and training resources in relation to them. The plan will not extend regulation to those who solely care for children who are related to them. In Early Childhood Ireland, we recognise the scale of the challenge in moving childminding from an invisible informal sector to a regulated formal sector that sits properly within the early learning and care and school-age childcare system. Our learning from and experience of transitioning from an unregulated centre-based informal childcare sector to a regulated publicly funded one highlights the importance of the availability of appropriate supports and phased transition periods. It is also imperative that the registration process is smooth and clear for childminders. The timing of the phases will need to be signalled well in advance to them and to the statutory and non-governmental organisations tasked with supporting this sector so that we can all be ready. The action plan sets out a phased approach to reform. Phase 1 will be preparatory, lasting 2 to 3 years. Phase 2 will be a transition phase lasting 3 to 5 years. And then Phase 3 will involve full implementation with the end of all transitional arrangements. Early Childhood Ireland believes that the phased approach to reform as set out in the plan is reasonable. We have a concern about a caveat in the plan about timing, however, quote, while the end point is clear, and we know that that's 2028, the action plan leaves open the precise timing of movement between phases 1, 2 and 3, given the potential cost to the Exchequer of opening the National Childcare Scheme to childminders. The timing of transition from phase 1 to phase 2 will be budget dependent and will depend on agreement with the Department of Expenditure and Public Reform, end quote. The government needs to prioritise completing these phases, given the interests of children and their families, and to avoid any unnecessary delays for childminders. The estimates indicated in the plan are not exorbitant, rising to €23 million per annum by phase 3. This amount of investment is not beyond the reach of a wealthy country. It is vital that children of all ages can benefit from quality experiences, whether their parents avail of a childminder and/or a setting. As I have said, Early Childhood Ireland welcomes the publication of the National Action Plan for Childminding. We believe it is a positive step forward as childminders already play a vital role in the provision of both early learning and care and school-age childcare. This needs to be recognised, valued and supported. We hope that members of the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Children, Disability, Equality and Integration will play a role collectively and individually within your communities to support and promote this plan. Finally, we wish to thank the Chairperson for the invitation on your behalf to attend today, and to the Clerk and her team for their support in advance of this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks very much to all of our witnesses. So I'm going to open it up for questions now, and just to say to witnesses that we take each deputy or senator individually. Everybody has a 5-minute slot, so we're going to start with Deputy Jennifer Murnan O'Connor. And Deputy, can you just confirm your location firstly, please? You're still on mute. Can we unmute her?
No, I think it's okay. Apologies.
You're perfect now. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, apologies. Thank you very much, Chair. And I just want to also thank the witnesses today. I think this is so important. First of all, I suppose I just want to share my concerns expressed by Ida, particularly about the programme being fully, I suppose in the sense of it, the implementation of the plan is it a bit overly ambitious? And I think maybe we need to find out more about that, in the sense of, I know this was began in 2016. And we are now in 2021. But the questions I would like to know is, how many childminders notified to the City and County Childcare Organisation? And in the drafting of this document, how many childminders sat on the board? Secondly, there was mention of thousands of childminders caring for children who will be facing the new regulations. And we all know that childminding is a home from home. And you know, it is so important. We must fully support these childminders with real and purposeful investment, because they cannot be left behind, as many of them are not even aware yet of these changes. I'm also concerned about that the increased regulation and administration and inspection will result in high financial costs to the childminders, which may end up being passed on to hard-pressed parents. And we know ourselves now how parents are finding, you know yourself, working and paying childcare. So I think it's important that we get more information on that. So my other questions are, what do you think would be a more realistic time frame, particularly about information and communication, because I think that needs to be looked at? And also, have we any idea about funding and what would be required to facilitate these changes? Thank you very much again to the witnesses. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy. I think your initial question was to Miss Ida Lane. Are you looking for everybody to come in, or just Miss Lane?
Well, yeah. Okay. Say how many childminders registered to TUSLA would be roughly about 80. And I had been myself, my county childcare committee, and we would have quite a number. I think maybe Bernadette or somebody else might be able to answer that one better, as how many. I know an awful lot of the Childminding Ireland childminders would probably be registered with the local county childcare committees. So I know we lost our childminding advisors years ago, so therefore we lost all support, so therefore they drifted away, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now it's trying to get them to come back again, and trying to get people to believe and trust in a system which has seriously let them down and excluded them before. And that's where I feel communication needs to come in, even with childminders in county childcare, registered with county childcare committees, and with Childminding Ireland, you need to involve them. Like they have, like myself, I would be a member as well. We've been excluded. We've not been included in things. We've had a bit of talk, but that's fair enough. A bit of involvement, fair enough. But then when it comes to draft plan, the Childminding Ireland childminders who would have garden vetting, who would all have insurance, who would all have paediatric first aid, who would all have safety training, all very, very conscious of how we want to be professional, not mentioned, excluded. And that is not good for building up trust. That's just my personal opinion.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to take over, please?
Deputy, did you want anybody else to come in on those? You have just a little over a minute left.
No, just I suppose, I mean, do we need to look at a more realistic time frame? As Ida has said there, like, you know, it is important that there is a lot of communication and information. And look, we know this service is excellent. That's not in question. But you know yourself, I think it's important that we all have to, everyone has to be listened to. And I think it's important that everyone gets that chance. So that's why I'd even asked that with the drafting of the document, how many childminders actually sat on the board, because I think that's so important that we do listen to everyone. And I would ask that that would be, all this would be taken into consideration from today. So thank you. And if anyone wants to come back in, maybe Francis, maybe, or whatever, yeah.
But so,
Or Mary, yeah.
maybe Mary would like to come in.
Or Mary, yeah.
Just you asked the question there, how many childminders sat on the original drafting of the plan? One childminder, that was myself.
That was it.
Yeah.
So I just actually see that Miss Orbinsky-Burke and I think also Miss Marion Quinn have their hands raised. Just want to check, did you want to come in at this stage?
Yeah, just to say to the Deputy, I don't know the number of childminders who are voluntarily notified, but that's probably something we could find out for the committee and come back to you. Certainly, Childminding Ireland, we have about 2,000 childminding contacts, of whom about 720 are members. And we have childminders on our board working in our office. You know, they're fully throughout the whole organisation. But certainly we can come back to you. We can get in contact with CCCs and come back with that information for you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
No problem.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Mary, Miss Quinn, did you want to come in on this part?
No, it's fine. No, thanks
Okay.
to those answers. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, so we're moving on then to our second speaker, Deputy Patrick Costello. And Deputy, can you just confirm your location, please?
Thanks, Chair. I am in Leinster House, my office here in Leinster House.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I just to pick up as Deputy Marnan O'Connor said, you know, in her questions there about the number of childminders involved in developing the action plan on the various working groups, as we've seen from the presentation, the answers how small that or almost non-existent that number is. So I think certainly one recommendation we can be making out of this committee is that looking at, you know, if we are making decisions, or if the Minister is making decisions in relation to a particular sector, extensive consultation with that sector is important. And one of the things I'm conscious of is that, which has been raised by people, is that the informal nature of some childminding, you know, we can see the huge the huge differences in numbers between the estimates of how many childminders there are versus how many are in Tusla versus even how many are engaged with the various organisations here. There's big differences there. So I guess for me, my question is, and I guess I'm also worried because if we rush any attempt to regulate, and if we get it wrong, the ultimate consequence will be that we drive childminders out of the sector and people will just not mind children. And as someone who's seen their creche fees go up recently, that's not good for anyone, especially the children who are benefiting from the services at the minute. So I guess, you know, obviously one of the ways to do it properly is to include groups, the groups who are about to be regulated, but also it's about reaching out to people. And that point about the lack of engagement, the difficulty engagement, the informal nature has been raised several times and in several ways. So what I'd love to hear from the witnesses is how do we reach out to those, to childminders? If there's an estimated 15,000 and there's 4,000 in linking with Childminding Ireland and only 80 linked with Tusla, how do we reach all of those 15,000? And I'd love to hear you guys, as the people we're trying to reach, how we do that.
Is there anyone in particular, Deputy, or do you want to hear from everybody?
If perhaps each organisation,
Okay.
I think each has a slightly different take on things, so if each could give me a very quick answer, just that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll start then. I see Miss Quinn has her hand raised. We'll start and then we'll move on to Childminding Ireland. So, Miss Quinn.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. I think a huge advertisement, a huge campaign, awareness-raising campaign is going to be needed on the national airways, in the national newspapers, kind of discussions happening straight away in relation to the benefits for this and how it's needed and how it's going to support and help the childminders, children and the families that kind of work with them. And I suppose because it is linked to potential for parents accessing the National Childcare scheme, they could be bringing it to the attention of the childminders as well, who might not have picked up on it or might not even think that it's something that directly kind of relates to them, or that they could be engaged with it. But this needs to happen over time. I mean, you identified there a while ago that it took 5 years to put together the plan, so we can't rush the implementation of the plan without actually contacting the childminders and the families that are kind of directly involved, because you're right, we will lose them if things are rushed on them too quickly. So whether it's the participation or whether it's the qualification or whatever it is. Thank you.
Thanks. Then Ms. Burke, Ms. Urbinski-Burke, I think you had your hand raised as well. Yep.
Yep, thanks, Deputy. Further to what Marion was saying there, which is absolutely correct, I mean, an awful lot of money needs to be spent on this communication piece, because childminders work alone. So that it's not like you can contact a big group in a creche, for example. You need to actually put money into communications and advertising for sure. I think there are two other things though. Parents, we can also try and contact childminders through the parents using their services, maybe through schools for school-age children and other vehicles for preschool perhaps. And the other thing is a relationship-based form of child care. And I think that an awful lot of the childminders know other people who are childminding. And I think we can branch out through, if we have more resources, we can branch out through that network. But I really take the Deputy's comments that it is something that is going to take time to do properly. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Ms. Byrne and then Ms. Heaney.
Thanks so much, Deputy Function. I suppose I didn't realise the boss had joined the call, so I'll keep this short. I'm sure Teresa's anxious to speak. I suppose, I would just say that even in Scandinavian countries, and two in particular, and we're inclined to hold them up as examples of the direction that we want to go in here in Ireland in terms of investment and of course subsidies for parents, and in terms of quality. And in two of those countries, childminders are regulated. They are treated as professionals like the rest of the workforce. So just to say, it's what we're looking to do is very challenging because of where we're coming from in Ireland, but it's not impossible. And I think it's important that we are keeping children at the centre of this. It's certainly important for children, and we would argue for childminders themselves to be brought in a timely way, in a reasonable way. And look, nobody is talking about the kind of regulation that settings have to go through. Absolutely not. It doesn't make sense. So I suppose it's not outside our wits to do it. I entirely agree with our ACP colleagues. This is about government taking responsibility and getting the word out. And one of our concerns is that if there's a stopping and starting in relation to the phases, it will undermine both confidence from families and confidence from childminders. So just some words of caution there. Thank you, Deputy Function.
Thanks. Ms. Teresa Heaney, I think you're here with us now.
Thank you, Deputy Function, and apologies for being late. I was at another meeting with the department, and I didn't hear my colleagues from Childminding Ireland or OCP, so forgive me if I'm saying anything that has already been said. But just to comment on Deputy Costello's questions about how do we do this, and I agree with Bernadette that we do need a very significant advertising campaign. But some of the things that we do have is that we have experience in this country of bringing an unregistered sector into registration previously, because it's quite recent that the centre-based service have become registered. So we do know how to do that. We've done it quite recently. We also have a very significant infrastructure in TUSLA, in the City and County Childcare Committees, in the voluntary childcare organisations, and we have a small, but I would imagine growing, childminding advisory cohort around the country. So we do have infrastructure. We have the National Parents Council that now has an early years division, and I have no doubt that they would be very supportive as well. So we do have infrastructure, but that infrastructure will all need significant resourcing if we are to target and achieve the 15,000 additional early years and school-age childcare settings that exist out there that children are attending on a daily basis, because that's the preferred choice of their parents. Thank you, Deputy Thompson.
Thanks very much. And then Ms. Lane, you wanted to come in?
Yes, apologies. Yes, I agree there with the significant resourcing, the building up of trust and strong collaboration. But because I actually straddle both, I run this very small ECI in my home, but I've also been doing childminding. So I stand in both camps. ECI and our centre-based care has had roughly 30 years to get to where it is now. And we're going to ask childminders who know nothing, that don't even know this is happening, to be regulated in 7 years' time. I don't see how that's going to happen. We need to go it a bit slower, engage, show and build up strong trust. Then I think we will be successful. But if we rush into this headlong, we're heading for trouble. That's what I have to say.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on then to our third speaker, Senator Éireann McGrahan. And Senator, can you just confirm your location too, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm in Leinster House. Thank you all for coming. It was very interesting and very informative. We all recognise that childcare in this country has been, underfunded, misunderstood, and under-respected for far too long. So to have this conversation and to have an action plan is so positive. But we're looking at the pitfalls, and I know myself from knowing childminders, needing childminders, being in a rural area as well where we don't have access to a lot of to centre-based care for children. Childminding is the only way that you can look after your children. So I just think with all this regulation, I think is there a huge potential, and I personally feel there is, and I hope I'm very wrong, a huge potential that there will be a significant number of drop-off of childminders, not just going, I'm not doing this, I only want to do this for a couple of years, when my own children are young, and then I go back to work when my own kids go to school, or I'm in this game long enough, I'm giving up, I'm bowing out. So I fear that there will be a real problem there in how do we support childminders who are, I imagine, the majority are female. So how do we support, empower our childminders to give regulation to the incredible service that they already give? Because this is why us parents hand over our children to childminders, because they are the second mothers, and they're so important to a family. So I would just ask about that significant drop off, and I also want to ask, how do we create that balance between the centre base and that childminding? Because the centre base, and for the older child as well, particularly, is so important. So and other people have covered an awful lot of my questions about resources and awareness and that. So those two questions, please. Thank you to anyone who has an opinion on it. I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Senator. Does anybody want to? Okay, Ms. Quinn, firstly, anyway, if you want to come in on those.
Yes, thank you very much. So you're correct, Deputy Green, in relation to the potential for drop-off. Regulation is going to be something that, even with a light touch kind of coming in kind of gently, it is something that is a change of practice. And we know that change is something that takes a while in terms of for people to embrace and to engage with. And depending on the level of change then, because these are changes that are going to need to be made in the childminder's own home, and possibly to the infrastructure of their home and to the routine and order in the child's home. So if it's not done in a way that that brings childminders with them, so in terms of having built up the trust, and the trust that once regulation starts, that it's not going to snowball, and we know from experience in centre base that some of the level of regulation that's required is excessive, and there are services that are, I suppose you've got small services that cater for could be 15 children up to services that cater for 300 children who are all experiencing the same level of regulation. So I suppose there want to be absolute assurances for the childminders that that isn't something that's going to happen, and that it would be phased, and that yes, absolutely, at the centre of this is our children and children's safety, and that obviously is hugely paramount. But we need to do it in a kind of phased way to prevent that drop off, and it does come down again to the kind of building of trust, because if you're not going to trust your partners in this development, then you are going to go, look, I'm leaving because I don't know what's coming down the road, or this is the start of a slippery slope, and so we need to have people mindful of that in the process.
Thanks. Ms. Orbinsky-Burke. I think you were looking to come in.
Sorry, just to add to what Marion was saying there, which I completely agree with, is that nobody is in this for the money. There's very little money in childminding, and if regulation is too onerous, if the administrative burden is too onerous, it'll be an absolute disaster. We don't want to see a curriculum in a family home. So that was just a little bit I wanted to add.
Okay.
Mary wanted to come in as well.
Ms. Walsh, you're looking to come in, are you? Yeah.
Thank you. As a working childminder, I just want to say that that is the biggest fear, that we will lose childminders. We have excellent childminders who came through a previous system in the early noughties and who have continued to keep up their first aid, their Garda vetting, training, insurance, in the absence of any supports from government. The only supports we receive is from Childminding Ireland. It's really important that childminders have confidence in this process and that they're included and they're listened to. Childminding is very different from centre-based care. It's delivered in a family home. And the biggest fear that childminders would have is that they would have to turn their homes into mini creches. And this, it really needs to be recognised for the type of childcare that it is. It's home-based, it's home from home, and it's a totally different environment to centre-based care. All types of childcare can exist. However, in rural Ireland, the choice isn't there. And we need to ensure that there is childcare for the whole country.
Okay, thanks. And then Ms. Heaney also has indicated so.
Thank you, Deputy Funkston. Thank you very much for your question in relation to drop-off. Internationally, there is indeed some evidence that there is a challenge about retaining the numbers of childminders working in the profession, but these countries do have regulations, so it's not necessarily about regulation. It is about that workforce wanting to work in a sector that is professional and supportive, because that's how they see themselves. I would just like to take the opportunity to say that we can't wait for 30 years for these regulations. There are more children in childminders' homes today than there are in any centre in the country, and we really do need to support those childminders with that huge responsibility. And the other thing I would like to say is that the workforce is indeed, you're correct, I would say, I don't have the information, but I would imagine that it's 99.9% female probably. And these are women who don't have access to pensions probably in the main, and we need to be supporting that workforce as well as professional members of the early years workforce. And I think it's also important to say these regulations haven't been written. We haven't started writing these regulations. We don't know what the inspection regime is going to look like. So I think that the professionals that are joining me around this table have the wherewithal to make sure that that they are measured and that they are suitable, and that we don't see family homes becoming otherwise, because we do not want parents not having access to the childminding settings that they are choosing today in thousands.
Thanks. Ms. Lane, did you want to come in?
Very briefly, saying I have gone from being a childminder with 3 children to doing ECI with 6. So I have 6 children. I'm a very, very small service. And I have seen from having just a small number of policies, which were very simple to keep and do, to having 300 pages of policies. I have to have a policy for my hen in the back garden, having my dogs that are crated away, a goldfish policy. It is beyond ridiculous. And that's in my family home. I do not want to see that happening for any childminders. It cannot go that direction. You cannot be worrying yourself sick over, have I got a policy for whatever it is, you know? And it needs to be kept simple. It needs to be kept streamlined and completely different from centre-based. Because as I say, I went from childminder to being treated as centre-based, even though I only have 6 children. So it is very frightening prospect, and I understand completely where small childminders are coming from, and where they would be rattling in their boots and saying they can't face the stress of that, and they'll go. So that is something we have to be extremely mindful of. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so we're moving on then to Senator Mary Siri Carney, and Senator Conduit, just confirm your location too, please.
Thank you, Chair. I am in Leinster House. So I'm here. All right. So I suppose, first of all, I would say thank you very much for your participation, for coming and speaking so frankly with us today. I think that your submissions to us are very thorough and a very honest appraisal of the fears that would lie in the process ahead. I have to say I would despair at the notion that we couldn't get there by 2028. I think that the last year has proven the centrality and the absolute necessity of good quality childcare and how essential it is to everybody's quality of life, everybody's ability to function, and particularly for women who are the primary carers, despite our best efforts in the main, their access to the workplace. I think one of the lessons we've learned out of COVID also has been that a hybrid working model is in our future, and in order to do that we need childminding alongside creche and centre-based facilities. That said, I do hear everything that you're saying about the I suppose the fears with regard to regulation. My own experience of being an advisor and within the county and city childcare committees and being involved within the childcare sector has been that the current inspection regime and regulation regime is arbitrary in its application, causes a lot of administrative burden, and is remarkably difficult. And I'm looking forward to this committee reviewing that and taking it by the teeth and tearing it apart, I hope, into something that is more manageable, because it is onerous for centre-based providers. So I think it is essential that you guys are involved in the putting in place the regulations as we go forward. My party over the last couple of weeks and months have conducted a widespread care of the child consultation, and we've run policy labs, and arising out of that we have found that the priority, 81% of the participants were parents, but that people required availability, affordability and location. And to me, childminding fits those really, really nicely and really, really well. So from that point of view. So I think that we have, maybe I would ask you to give me an insight in what do you think are reasonable regulations? What do you think should be expected of childminders in their home? That'll be the first thing. And the second thing, when it comes to qualifications, I believe that they should be all QQI accredited. I believe that we should be setting up childminding as a career, a career path and a career of choice for as many as possible. And looking at qualifications in that regard. But for those that are currently childminders, we could have the possibility of maybe using grandfathering system to recognition of experience in a way that wasn't facilitated in the professionalism and in the centre based. So I think that we can learn from where we missed and lost people in that process. I think that we can bring that forward and into this. So I'd be particularly interested in hearing what you have to say on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator. Did you want to hear from everybody or any particular?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes, please.
So the first person I see is Ms. Frances Byrne, if you want to come in.
Thank you, Deputy Function, and thank you, Senator Siri Carney. Very, very insightful commentary. Agree completely about the gendered nature. I think that one of the things that we often talk about is, looking at early years and school age care through a number of lenses. And as you have said, despite progress and despite a lot of us wanting it to be a different way, it's a hugely gendered issue on the demand side, if I could put it that way. It has a huge impact on working mothers, whether we like it or not, the cost and so on. But that isn't right. But also we've a very gendered workforce, very and I include childminders in that, and providers are overwhelmingly women as well. All doing brilliant work, but it would be wonderful to see more men. 98% of staff in settings, for example, are women, and what we really need is more investment so that salaries and so on can increase, and that it becomes a viable career, as you have said. And certainly also welcome what you're saying about COVID. I mean, we absolutely did see the sharp end of the way society can fall apart, and if all the childcare options aren't available, and of course childminding on the face of it lends itself to, a lot of childminders are already working in pods. Centre-based care had to catch up with that, if you will. So we learned a lot about our sector very, very broadly. To answer your questions, I think I don't think anybody has all the answers to the questions that you're asking. And as Teresa has said, it's about getting people around the table and making sure that the people who are involved every day, who know best, are involved in the decision making about that. With obviously the best interests of children centre to all of our shared concerns. No doubt that will be the case. Certainly there is a need for qualifications of some kind. It shouldn't be it shouldn't be the same as what is currently expected from those who work in settings. But that said, the workforce development planning is ongoing. It will be reporting by the end of the year. It does, and there is at the moment a childminding working group. It does present us all with an opportunity to influence what comes out of that. So by the end of this year, we do have some answers and some guidance. And I know that ourselves and other organisations have been working very hard in those forums. I think, though, what I would say finally is that if we don't get this right, and I agree with you, I think the time is reasonable, but government will really have to get serious about this, both in terms of investment, communicating with parents, communicating with society, communicating with childminders, most of all. And, we often refer to parental choice. And I suppose what Early Childhood Ireland wants to see is by 2028, parents will have genuine parental choice. So at the moment, there are parents who would love to choose a creche, or would love to choose a childminder, or would love to choose a combination of them. And as we've heard, one of your other colleagues on the committee can't make a choice because of where they are. So I suppose it's about ensuring that everybody is brought in, and so that parents can fully act in the best interest of their children and make all those decisions appropriately by then.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks. So I'd see Miss Mary Walsh as well. Mary, you want to come in on this one?
You asked the question, what do we need? Before we look at regulations or anything else, childminders need to be brought to the table and listened to.
I think we really well and truly heard that. I suppose it is other things other than that. You know, I think you have.
I suppose we need to point out the fact
you're going to put that forward very clearly. But you're here now, so what other things we would need, and what would regulation look like?
I don't know what regulation would look like, but I think it has to be workable, it has to be reasonable, it has to maintain the home-from-home environment that childminders offer to children. Childminders are single-handed providers. We cannot end up spending our days generating mountains of paperwork to satisfy tick box exercises. Mm-hmm. There has to be an examination of what the quality of home-based childcare and what the markers for that are. But as I say, we're a long way away from that yet, because nobody's asked us yet.
I suppose I'm asking you now.
Yeah. Well, as a childminder, I've worked for 26 years in my own home providing childcare. I initially thought I would be a childminder for 3 years until my children went to school. I have remained doing that. For me, what would be reasonable is that the house would be safe, that you would have adequate precautions taken to ensure that no child is in danger. I do not want to have to create a sleep room in my home. I don't want to have close off my kitchen, because the kitchen is part of my home. It's part, the children have access to that. And it's that distinction, that the house remains a home and that the children are in a similar environment to what they left in their own home that morning.
So that is part of the offering of childminding, is that preservation of the home experience as opposed to the centre experience, and that's what should be central in the design of any regulations in this regard. That's really what I'm hearing you saying. You know, it isn't practical to have a sleep room. It isn't practical to close off a kitchen. Children should have that freedom to roam in the same way as they would in their own home, and that is one of the beauties of the choice of childminding. Well,
I think that should be the overriding thought in anybody's minds who are designing these regulations.
Yeah.
Okay, now we do have a number of speakers still that haven't had the chance to come in, so I'm going to move on. And I know there's a number of witnesses looking to get back in, but if people want to maybe come back in the next round of questions with whatever thoughts you have on this one. So Deputy Mark Ward is next. And Deputy, can you confirm your location too, please?
Thanks, Chair. I am in Leinster House 2000, and thanks to the witnesses there for very insightful into childminding. And I'm listening to what's being said, and what I'm hearing is that we don't need to regulate childminders out of childminding. And I think the analogy around the goldfish, I did smile and I did smirk when that came up. We don't need to get to that level of regulation when it comes to your own home and children in their own home. So we just have to be mindful of that. There was also 2 questions, Chair, or 3 questions, and I'll ask them all at once. There was mention about the potential increase in costs for childminders and the potential that could be passed on to parents alike. And I'm a firm believer that regulation doesn't necessarily have to mean taxation. But what tax incentives would you like to see your members and also parents be able to avail of that would make things better, is the first question. The second question, I was kind of asked the last time, but I want to follow up again. Like if there was magic wand time, And if you were charged with developing the National Childcare scheme, what would be the one thing that you would insert in that would make things better for your members? Just the one thing, because I know we're limited in time. And the very last thing I want to know was, has any of you engaged with our major concerns known to the Children's Ombudsman, and what would your concerns be, and would you, if you wouldn't mind sharing them with the committee? Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. I know Ms Quinn had indicated in the last round, so I'm going to let you in first, and then if witnesses want to indicate now if they want to come in on this. So Ms Quinn firstly.
Thanks very much. I suppose part of mine was in relation to Deputy Secretary Carney's, in relation to qualifications, and I suppose, there are a lot of various different courses that have been offered over the last number of years, both to childminders and to centre-based staff. And I think it's about maybe developing those in terms of micro-credentials, whether it's 2 credits that's kind of given to them. There's a QAP process that, kind of a supporting quality that childminders have engaged with over a number of years. And there's a piece of work that goes into that. There was a kind of attendance at workshops, etc. If that had been developed into a micro-credential, it would meet learning outcomes, documented learning outcomes, and they would have X amount of credits done already. The same in relation to if you're going to do something about child protection, or if you're going to do something, in early year services, we have the quality regulatory framework. If all of those things were accredited, before you know it, you'd have that at least a foundation qualification, if not beyond a foundation qualification.